Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hi, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am so excited to have Jen Elmquist on today. And Jen, introduce yourself. Let everyone know who and what your awesomeness is. And I can't wait to talk to you about all things couples and relationships today.
Oh my gosh, Joy, thanks. I'm super excited too. I know we were just talking about the fact that we got to meet really briefly at a conference, and we barely got to spend time together, but we feel like over social media, it's been like 2 years.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah, I feel like we know each other so well. But
well, and I can honestly say you're one of those people that I feel drawn to. Oh, I want to know more. You know, some people you're like, oh, this was a great introduction. They're awesome. They're doing great work in the world. But some I just like, oh, I just want to know more about this person. I have to say you are one of those. So it's been really great to stay connected, and I'm really honored that you're sharing some of your afternoon to come on. So tell our listeners what it is that you do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And the reason you and I initially connected was I had just written a book called Relationship Reset, Secrets from a Couples Therapist That Will Revolutionize Your Love for a Lifetime. So that, I guess, is the opening to what do I do? Well, I've spent a lot.
The book is awesome. The book is really, really good, Jen. And I say that with a lot of authenticity around your approach to couples work. And I read a lot, and anyone who is in a relationship or wants to be in a relationship and a successful relationship would get so much out of the book. So we'll make sure there's a link to it in our show notes so people can get access to it because it's really well done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And, you know, it really was a passion play for me. I'd spent over a decade doing the clinical work as a couples therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, spent time in clinical practice, taught. Actually, I'm in Minnesota, so taught at St. Mary's University here in Minnesota in their marriage and family therapy department. Couples 101 was the master's level class I taught for a long time.
I think everyone ever should probably have taken a Couples 101 class, huh?
I wish I had. I had been married probably when I first took that class when I was in grad school. I had been married for probably 13 years. And then by the time I took that class, I'd probably been married almost 20 years. I've now been married 29 years. So
congratulations.
All in stages. We learn as we go. And yes, I every time I teach that class, I relearn from it because we were talking about earlier, it's a constant journey of learning in your relationship.
Oh, and relationships are so hard. And unfortunately, so much of society paints up to be these pictures of bliss all the time. And I try to make a point on my social media to throw some really authentic posts in there, like when I'm struggling or when things are going on, because I think people need to know, like that's so normal.
It is. It's so normal. And that was a big part of writing this is, you know, I'd spent all those years with people in office, and you know this because you do similar work, but so often when people come in to see a couples therapist, they come in crisis. I mean, the statistic is they actually come 6 years after problems start. So problems start, they're probably trying to solve it in all the ways that we think we know how. And obviously there's a lot of self-help resources out there, but sometimes there's just no replacement for being face-to-face with a third party that can give you an objective viewpoint on your relationship.
It's so true. And they're likely just recreating the same unskillful patterns that maybe they witnessed in their family of origin growing up or that they've developed in reaction to one another. And I mean, did you find that most people, once they got to couples therapy, mentally or somewhat emotionally or physically, just kind of almost even had one foot out the door, like this was the last resort?
Absolutely. Well, and I think we tend to see one of two things. You either have people that are they're just bleeding and they're wounded and they're exhausted. And that's not always the great frame of mind to learn new skills and practice new skills because it takes a lot of energy to do that. Or we would find one person would come in the relationship and they were already done and they were really just dropping off the partner that still needed some support. And so that makes for really hard recovery work and really hard to rebuild or in many cases, build a foundation that can get them moving in the right direction. So when I wrote Relationship Reset, it was genuinely out of the passion that I wanted to get to people before they came to me. I just wanted to know everything my clients knew before they came to my office. So
I'm so glad you did that, because, and you made a comment that I want to speak to a moment, and it's so true that when they come in crisis, right, and we know that emotions and logic are two different parts of the brain,
yes.
And when our emotional brain takes over, we can't access those tools. So when that crisis mode is, overriding every aspect of their lives, those tools aren't very accessible.
No.
But we don't keep coming back after the crisis has passed, when actually those tools would be accessible.
Yes, it's really, in some ways, it's too bad. It's a backwards model, I think.
Yeah.
Another passionate play of mine, and I think of yours too, is that idea of just preventive mental wellness, of getting in front of mental health crisis by taking care of good, having good mental hygiene and taking good relationship hygiene and learning those skills early and practicing them often so that we have resilience when we meet crisis points. But I think one of the things that is a myth is that couples believe that if we fall in love and then we make a commitment, we'll have everything we need to make it work. And that is so not just, it's just like, just because you have a baby doesn't mean you have everything you need to be a good parent, right?
Or I have parents, so I must know how to be a parent, right? Oh my gosh, it is so true. And I often, I've always been fascinated by couples. And I remember, so I met my ex-husband when I was 13. We started dating when I was 14, and we were together for 23 years. And got divorced at 36. And at the time, for many years, I really thought it worked. And we were like that couple. We were the ones that everyone, like, our names were one word. There was no sense of individual identity. We got along really well. We liked the same things. It was easy, but it was also much of it was surface level. And so I actually thought this was like this amazing relationship because there was no conflict.
Sure.
And then I started to kind of wake up a little bit and have a little bit of delayed individuation and separation that I should have had in my early teenage years, but was a bit delayed till my early 30s. And with the question of who am I outside of this relationship? Who am I on my own? And I didn't know. And it put me into a new level of awareness and observing the relationship to realize, wait a second, this isn't all that skillful. There's no vulnerability. There's no effective communication. Just because we're not fighting doesn't mean we're communicating well.
Exactly.
Because it's easy doesn't mean it's what's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And yes, it takes two to tango. So there's no externalization there, but I think we, grew apart in many ways. And, I used to play the game of, who is going to be our friends who get divorced? And then one day I was like, oh my God, holy shit, that's going to be me.
Wow.
And
that's so great.
Yeah. And all through that whole time, couples just fascinated. What makes them work? What makes them not? What makes for attraction or chemistry or a good sex life? And I know that's a huge piece of why I became a marriage and family therapist, was to get to work with these people who I continued to grow and learn about. So what got you into really wanting to work with couples? And as you were married and going through this process, what was that like parallel of I'm learning, but I'm in it?
Well, it's so true. Well, and I actually draw it all the way back, and I write about this actually in the end of the book, which in hindsight I probably should have put in the beginning. But I talk about my husband's and my story of how we were married our first year of marriage, and very similar, married very young. So I think if there's people listening to us and your story is you met in high school, you met in college, or kind of your early 20s, this is an important thing to consider, is the fact that, well, your brain's not done developing until you're 25. And when you're leaving your family and you're moving directly into building a new family system with your partner, and there's not time for you to do that individuation or really become that individual on your own, there is a whole other level actually of growing up you have to do in a relationship with somebody else. It's going to challenge you on a different level. And it really challenged both my husband and I. We came, we both looked great on the outside. We came from these really upstanding family systems, and it would seem as if everything was perfect. And yet on the inside, just something was missing. It just wasn't what we had hoped or wanted it to be. And there was a lack of probably passion, definitely a lack of vulnerability and intimacy, but externally we could put on a good show, which I'm kind of hearing maybe you experienced in a similar way.
Absolutely. And I'm sure many people understand that.
Yeah.
I once heard, I'm going to interject really quick. I once heard a quote, and I think it was when I was at a day-long retreat, and I want to say it was Rick Hansen who said it, and I could be wrong. So if Rick is ever listening and this is not your quote, then I apologize. But someone really well-known said this, and he said, it takes 6 good dates, 6 meals, and some good sex, and now you're in a committed relationship.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't take much.
No.
There's attraction.
I think we want to jump to what's next, right? We're always wanting to jump to what's next over what is. So I think that definitely is where we tend to go.
It's like, it takes, a couple good meals and some good sex, and now you're committed, but it takes like 5 years to get out of it if you don't want to stay in it.
And it's true, because you do create a bond, you do care, you build friendship. Sure. Usually pretty rapidly. So I think for most couples, when they get to the place where I'm discontented, it's not typically I'm so discontented I want to get rid of you or the relationship, but it is I'm so discontented I feel stuck and I don't know what to do. And I think that's the place my husband and I found ourselves in 1 year into our marriage, when we went and saw a couples therapist for the very first time. And he said something so profound to us at the time. He said, you know what, it's like, because you can project on the outside that you've got everything going, but you're not feeling it on the inside, it's like the two of you have a cellophane wall between you, where you can feel each other, but you can't really touch each other.
Wow, that's really powerful.
It was very powerful for us because it was true. I think we definitely did feel that. We did the work we could that first time around, but by the time we hit the 3rd year of our marriage, which statistically is a breaking point, we think 3, 7, 15, and 20, I think, are some of those natural breaking years to marriage. But, about the 3rd year, then you're to the place like, yeah, we might be friends, but I'm kind of done with your shit. And so I really don't know if I want to do this at all. So at that point, we actually, and it was a really important moment for us. And we share this, actually, we'll do relationship reset live events. We've done some in the past. That was actually
awesome.
But we've shared this with couples, is we had the place where we looked at each other and said, because we had, we came from a fairly religious upbringing, and divorce wasn't something that was easily entertained for us at that time, we said to each other, I've actually wished that you would die. And only in the sense that it would feel like the easiest way to step or escape.
Get out of the relationship.
Yeah. And
that's a reflection of just the ultimate in feeling stuck, right?
It is the ultimate of what's my easiest path? What's the path of least resistance out of this? And for us, that was a beautiful, transparent moment. I think about everything that Brené Brown talks about when she talks about vulnerability and transparency and letting go of shame and all that good stuff. But in our couple relationship, and I think this is so true for most couples, when you really say it all and there's nothing else left on the table to talk about, you really start the work. And whether that is the work toward each other or it's the work towards releasing each other. Because I really don't believe in putting on couples that sense of shame around whether or not you stay together or don't stay together. I think relationships speak to our growth as individuals, and they speak to our growth collectively because we're meant to grow in a relationship.
Yeah, I shared with you a few minutes before we started recording this that my husband and I, my ex-husband, but when we were married, we went through 3 different couples therapists. And, the first one was a little too egotistical to actually get us to do the work. Although he did say something quite powerful of that. We started off on a similar trajectory, and then I started to grow, and he kind of made this motion with his hands like I was veering off. And he looked at my husband and said, if you don't grow with her, she'll be gone. And my husband at the time said, kind of demonstrating this is where he was. He goes, well, this is me. Love me for me. And the therapist was like, okay, that's great. And she's growing. So you got to grow a little bit with her. And he kept insisting, this is me. Love me for me. And the therapist was like, okay, that's great. And understand she will be gone if you don't grow with her. At least a little bit. It doesn't have to be fully, but, a little bit of that joint growth. Or women in their 40s or older are going to expect you will have grown and done some of this work. So if not do it for now, do it for the future.
Sure.
We didn't stick with that therapist for long. The second couples therapist was awful. But the third one was revolutionary to me because the very first time she returned my first phone call, she said to me, do you want to stay married? And I was like, no one's ever actually asked me that, because the assumption was always to fix it. And I thought, what an amazing question, because it never entered my mind, truly. Because it's always, well, we got to fix it. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. And she was an amazing therapist, but she also helped us divorce amicably.
Which is important.
Which is, became my highest goal at that point, was just because we're not supposed to, or because I didn't really believe we were supposed to stay married, doesn't mean we're supposed to be enemies, doesn't mean we're supposed to hate each other, or, look negatively on our entire childhood and growing up together. Like, I didn't want to taint any of that, because it really wasn't that bad. It just, we grew differently.
Yeah, you hit a different place. Well, and I know now you found a lovely relationship with John, who actually was your partner John first before you
did the conference together.
Yep. But, and then you experience what happens when you are with someone that is growing or is on pace in a place where you want to head to in life. And it does dramatically change the relationship. And I think couples have that choice. And that's a big part to me in working with couples, and in the experience my husband and I had in, writing Relationship Reset, is if your choice is you want to work together and you want to build the best relationship you can have, there's really universal information out there that applies to all types of relationships, whether whatever gender configuration is in your relationship, whatever challenges are in your relationship, you as a couple, there are universal things that you can work on together that will bring depth and satisfaction and success to relationships.
Amen to that, because, we all think our problems are unique. We often don't share what those are. And so, we don't express to others when things aren't going well. I was like that when my marriage I was like, that couple that all of our friends looked at that had the perfect relationships. I didn't want to ruin that image by saying, I'm actually not that happy. Yeah. Or we're not deeply connected, or our sex life sucks. Like, no one says these things easily.
Right.
And so it takes a lot of vulnerability to admit it to ourselves, let alone to communicate it, to even how to ask for the help.
Yes.
And like you said, when you're in a partnership in which you both are free to express that to each other, because that might even be a safe place for a couple to say to each other, I'm not happy, I'm feeling stuck, I don't know how to get through this, right? Then we just withdraw, or maybe distance, or act out, or externalize, or, whatever the course of action may be. But, John and I, we laugh that, damn it, we're human, because as we both teach this stuff, there's an assumption we always know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so no matter how much knowledge you have, we're still human, right? We still have old wounds, old triggers, childhood stuff, previous relationship stuff, personal stuff. Like, it's so easy to get so stuck. And even when there is that access to information, doesn't always mean it's easy to implement.
It doesn't mean it's easy to implement. And I think that goes back to what you asked me when we kind of first started this conversation is, what was that like for me to take that parallel journey of working with couples, teaching people how to work with couples, being in my own marriage. And, my journey started with a real catalyst of being challenged to work through my relationship and grow up with somebody. And we both, we were both in a space, we accepted that challenge, that growth became immense. But I always say, if you're going to be with someone long-term, in a long-term relationship, marriage, you're going to have 4 versions at minimum of that relationship. And there are times, like in our case, where an original part of your relationship needs to die and you have to resurrect something new, which means it's actually safety in saying to your partner, hey, the way we've done it has to change, or I'm feeling that the way we've done it is changing. And I don't know that it's going to be easy, but I think it's time for us to lay that one to rest and see if we can start something fresh or new with each other. It's really
takes so much courage to even say that.
It does. It does take courage, but I think the alternative is to get stagnant. And I think what happens when we get stagnant is we not only lose each other, we lose ourselves in that process. And that's where you see people become more apathetic. They become bored. They start to squirt out on the sides, and people get hurt unnecessarily. So the bravery of actually saying, let's see what we can do.
The biggest fear that I have in my current relationship, which I see as a very long-term committed relationship, though we're not engaged or married, to me that means nothing. It's, it means a lot, but it doesn't shift the level of commitment I have.
Yeah.
But to me, one of my biggest fears is complacency.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about that, that having a successful marriage, and I know that you quote it, and I've trained under Dr. John Gottman as well,
Mm-hmm.
How to have that relationship that thrives is those little things often.
Yes.
What we can do, just the little things. And then kind of the counter to that is a quote from Terry Real, great couples therapist, who says, marriage is death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not the big stuff that breaks it. It's the small, little, everyday,
Mm-hmm.
seemingly petty stuff that on its own may not be a big deal, but we accumulate these hurts, and we have fear of naming it. We don't know how to name it, or don't have the language or the role modeling to know what that kind of communication can look like. So we just build these resentments, and then the complacency kicks in, and then we're not having sex anymore. And then we start accusing, you don't love me, or you don't think I'm attractive, and we start fighting about the groceries.
Exactly. Well, it all snowballs downhill. And I like that you're pointing that out, because one of the things we talked about before we got started is what are just, as people walk away from this conversation today, are there actual tangible little takeaways we could give?
Yes.
And I think that's a big one you're talking about. It is the little things on a daily basis. I have a chapter in the book called The Big Small Things. And the idea that those little things of whether it's bringing, if you get a cup of coffee, bringing your partner a cup of coffee, if you walk across the room and they're next to you, reaching out and touching them, that it is those little things over time that matter. And simultaneously, another really little thing that matters is your expectations. And I think that's the other thing you're touching on is, if what we expect is it's always going to be great, or we're always going to feel attracted to each other, or we're always going to just even individually have energy and feel engaged in our lives, those are actually going to become unmet expectations. And with that will come disappointment, right?
Well, and
relationships work.
Yeah, the root of the work I teach is mindfulness, which is rooted in Buddhist practice, which is ultimately expectations are the quickest path to suffering.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
Buddhism summed up.
I love it.
So you mentioned it a moment ago, and I actually wanted to have you describe it, because in the book you lay it out really well, the different stages of a couple's committed relationship. And I think if you could share that and briefly break it down, because I love what you're saying of couples go through stages, and some of it feels evolutionary and natural. Some is like can throw us off our rocker and make us feel unbalanced and insecure. Mm-hmm. And again, to let couples know this is normal. We're human, right? We're going through, whether it's a life stage or whether it's, something joint we're experiencing, or even something that's happening individually. Mm-hmm. And this is, as I kind of give the context of why I'm personally really fascinated about this, is when I was in my marriage, I had no sense of individuality. Starting from 13 years old, I don't know who I was. I hadn't even individuated, separated from my mom. Yeah. I kind of put all of that into my relationship. Yeah. So it was fear-based and insecurity, and sure, we could psychoanalyze my intentions, and I didn't have a dad and all the good stuff, but it was what it was. Yeah. So when I needed to start to individuate and separate, that's when I felt like I don't know who I am outside of this relationship. Yeah. Right? And then I was a mother, so those roles come into confusion of who am I? Mm-hmm. But one of the things when I first met John was I said to him, I'm really afraid to lose myself again in relationship. Mm-hmm. And I need you to honor that in me. And so I still need to know what it feels like to be on my own for the first time. Mm-hmm. And what that means, and embrace myself outside of just a couple. Mm-hmm. And there have been times where that's been really easy for him to support and navigate. And there's times where it gets really stuck of, well, aren't we supposed to be a we now versus just these two individuals? And wait a second, you're off doing your individual stuff. I thought we were just the full we. Does that mean I need to now go do more of my individual stuff? So is that a tit for tat? Is it, well, we both need individual growth? When is the negotiation of the engagement? I'm living this right now. So it's all and coupled in this way, but I thought we're a committed partnership with this integration of blended families. So it can get really messy, even when you're aware.
Yes. Oh my goodness, it can. And the first step to it, and that's why what you're talking about is the chapter where I write about the cycle of change for couples, yes. What that cycle of change ultimately looks like in the relationship. And I talk about the 6 stages that a relationship will go through. And I think one of the reasons that it's so important, one, because it sets proper expectations that actually things are going to change and we are going to feel uncomfortable. And like you said, it also helps us understand that those are normal processes to go through. So change is never comfortable, right? If you think about like putting a seed in the ground and covering it with dirt and the amount of energy that it takes to actually push through the dirt and grow, that takes a lot of energy, and we're not any different. And we're not any different individually as we are with other people.
Yeah.
But, when I talk about the stages, I talk about the fact that, there's that original stage of where it's you and me and we meet, we fall in love, and then we become that we, right? That we couple where our bond, it's so important for us to bond and connect and create an attachment that we really do over-identify with each other and with who we are together. But that's foundational to building that attachment.
It's necessary.
It is. And once that is secure enough, which we hope that we can achieve, because that would be the goal, and that's hard in and of itself. But when we have some security in the relationship, that's when we feel like we can stretch. And we then move to that I and I, where it's like, okay, I don't have to spend every waking minute with you because I do still have to build a career. And I do still have to parent my children or see my friends or whatever it might be.
But wait, I have friends still? I need to go out with them? I need to maintain those? I should go back to the gym or...
Exactly. But those ways that we already know how to take care of ourselves as individuals so that we can be the best version of ourselves, because that makes us better as a couple. Yeah. So we stretch to that I. And then we enter that place that I call the we-I plateau, where we're in that constant tension. And, I love resetting the idea of what balance means, because if you really think about balance, it means that you're constantly in tension of maybe falling one direction or the other, right?
Push and pull, right? So we got to keep negotiating that balance. Oh, I love that visual.
And that ultimately is what makes that we-I plateau challenging. And that's usually a time in a couple's world where you're building a shared world together. And whether you're having children for the first time or you're blending families together, whether you're purchasing a home or you're moving in together, whether you might be, some couples then might choose to work together. There's all kinds of ways we create this shared world that did not exist before we existed before. And it becomes this world we have to balance and we both have to take care of along with ourselves. And then from
no tall order whatsoever.
Not at all. Not demanding that. But like anything in life, when we think of like the seasons and we think about how seasons change, there has to be a fallow season. So if fall comes and as the leaves fall and seasons start to change, we're challenged. Yeah. Things don't look the way they used to. It's not as sunny and it's not as bright and it's not as green. And we go through change like that in our relationships. And sometimes it happens because of an individual challenge. Sometimes it's a challenge in the relationship. Sometimes it's a distinct loss, an employment loss, the loss of a parent, But when change comes, it presses us.
I'm just going to comment on that because I have a handful of different client examples in which there's been a death of a parent, which has dramatically thrown the couple into a tailspin and either leads toward divorce or a lot of conflict. So I think that's a really important thing to point out, just some of those external experiences that impact us greatly, whether it's about our own mortality or our legacy or, oh shit, I haven't really lived, now what? Or I never... had the wild vacation home, or who knows, right? It brings up stuff for us, and not to expect that to happen. Again, expectations, right?
Yes, and it's going to. I think of like the natural the natural transition that all couples have to face when children leave, and all of the type of questions that raises, everything from who are we now without the distraction of our children to who am I as an individual without the identity of being an active parent the way I used to be.
And that's the classic question in couples therapy, at least the one that I ask, is who are you going to be when your kids leave the house? Because the kids are beautiful triangulation, but they can also be a huge crutch for couples pushing it off. But if you're not maintaining the relationship, I mean, I don't know the statistic, but a good many couples, as soon as the last one graduates, they're like, okay, I can go now. I've done my job, only to realize the kids are now in question of, wait, was my whole childhood real? What's my role model for the right marriage? I mean, it just raises a lot of hardships.
It does. It really does. A family system isn't done when children leave.
No.
But a couple's relationship
Can you just add, because I know, because I follow you on social media, and I love the hashtag, and then we'll get back to the final stages.
Yeah.
But what you do is your little hashtag for now that all you've got 2 children, correct?
Yes.
And they're now out of the house. I love what you say, and I use that now, and I quote you. I don't know if you started it, but I'm giving you the credit for it. So what is it that you call yourselves?
Well, we talk about empty nesting.
I love that.
We don't have an empty nest. We're empty nesting. And actually, I was telling you, I'm in the middle right now of working with a publisher on a next book, and that is actually one of them we're considering is writing empty nesting.
Yay! Empty nesting is so brilliant, Jen, because I think that the idea of empty nesting is so fear-inducing for couples.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what are we going to do now when we're just staring at each other? And I have to say, and anyone who's listening or watching who's divorced will likely agree, there's a little side benefit of divorce that no one is honest enough to say, which is you get some time away from your kids prior to them being 18, when you're still young enough to do some things that you may be wanting to do but not have to wait, X number of years to do. And I am a 100% committed, hands-on, full-time mom. I've got 80% custody of my kids. It's not so bad when there's a little break.
Yeah.
Right? It's really not so bad. Right now, I've got one daughter at sleepaway camp, and my other daughter is in Toronto heading to a camp. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Because I've individuated from some of these other roles. So my entire identity isn't wrapped up in this being a parent.
It's a huge
the way of the relationship, right?
It's a huge piece, and that's actually one of the things I'll talk to couples about when they're preparing or having a foresight to prepare for that transition, is to start to practice. So when your kids are in high school, start to do that. Let them have the autonomy, because it's good for them too.
They need to practice
the house when you're gone, or to head off and not be with you for a while, and then to use that time actually to focus on your relationship. But it's
the best model you could give to kids. I mean, John and I joke because our daughters, so his one daughter, my 2 daughters, we're very affectionate with one another, and I don't hide that from the kids, of snuggling or kissing or just, touching, massage, just each other's shoulders kind of thing. And of course, their teenagers are like, ew. And I'm like, great, let me role model for you an affectionate, healthy relationship.
Yes.
This is something good that you should want for yourself one day. So yeah, you're saying ew, but hopefully inside you're going, I want that when I get older.
Yes. And you know what? I couldn't agree with you more. I remember one of the professors I had in grad school, he was so great. And he used to say, you know what, if mom and dad aren't having sex, someone else is going to do it for them. And it is, so, I mean, then we're getting into the whole concept of intimacy in a relationship. But, when you start looking at change in a relationship, what are those ways you can still connect when you're in a stage of differentiating? Sex and intimacy is a way to still connect, even when you're feeling maybe a little unsure about who you are or where you're going. But it's still foundational. It really is a glue in the relationship, and modeling that for your kids is a really important thing.
I haven't quite been so bold as to say, we're going upstairs and I'm closing the door for some alone time yet, but I know the conversation's going to happen soon. So finish up. I think you named, the first 3 of the stages. I want to make sure we loop back around and get back to that, because there's, I think, really important content there.
Yeah, well, let's do that. And so I think we did talk about the WEI plateau of building that shared world and that balanced place. Then the differentiation we were talking about is, that's just a big word for change and trying to figure out, this is who I was, and I'm going over here and I'm not too sure who I'm going to be yet, but I'm in the process of figuring that out. And that's probably the hardest stage for couples to go through together. And it eventually leads, which is to me the final stage, which is it us or is it me? Where we do look and ask that perennial question of, should I stay, should I go, or do I remain in the status quo of what this relationship has always been? And to me, that is, my husband and I went through it. You and your ex-husband went through it. It's the place it's a critical conversation in a relationship where you look at each other and say, okay, we can't be who we were. And our choice now is to either go be someone new with someone else or on our own, or we need to find a new way to reconnect with each other.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I think if there was more conversation when couples first start dating about some of their expectation of relationships, their hopes, dreams, desires for relationships, what they were role modeled, what they liked, what they didn't, it would help be able to give a baseline for conversation.
Yes.
And there's just no infrastructure for couples to do that universally. And people think, oh, but I love them, so that should be enough. Yeah, love, it's not about love.
No.
And I often say to my clients, like, love is great and you need it, but that's not going to be what makes for a great relationship. Part of it is, do our needs align? And if we're on the same trajectory and our needs are aligning, then we can fall back on the love when we want. But if those needs are off kilter, or the trajectories of visions, it's hard to create that from not a solid foundation of it.
Yeah, I agree with you so much. And I think that's really what that last stage is to me, is those alignment conversations. And I think it needs to be normal for couples to know. I have never met a couple that at some point in their relationship on a micro or macro level doesn't look at each other and say, so we're still going to do this with each other. Right? And that doesn't necessarily mean there has to be the threat of divorce and this is terrible and we need to be done. Sometimes it merely is, I'm just not feeling the way that I've been feeling, and I got to find you again. Yeah. And that is a perfectly normal experience to go through. And when we can have those conversations with each other, and then we can work to find each other anew, we circle all back and we start that cycle again, because there is a fresh, deeper love that starts to build. To me, a long-term love, right? So I think of love as a feeling, and I think of love as an action. And, love as a feeling is that lust, it's the passion, it's the thing that burns in our belly. Love as an action is what develops over time, where it becomes so deep and foundational that you look at somebody else and say, I'm not too sure who I am without you, because my love runs so deep.
I love that. And I feel like I could talk to you for hours about relationships. So I might just have to have you on again if you're willing to share more of your time, because I think these are the real tangible things for couples and in relationships that people need to hear. And even just to understand, we can be really committed and we can start a new cycle.
Yeah.
And we can be really committed and we can need some alone time.
Absolutely.
And, that's something that I currently am experiencing, and, and I'm pretty open in talking about where I'm at in my relationship, because I want to roll. If I can't talk honestly and authentically about it, then I'm not doing my job. And I just came back from Europe for a month, and I didn't go with John, and he was not included on that trip, and that caused him a great deal of pain. And it's what I needed to do for me. And so part of that negotiation is, how can I honor and support what you need while it's causing me pain? And how do we stay connected throughout that process? Because that was a moment of individuation for me. It wasn't saying I'm not with you and I'm not committed to you, but I need to do this for my soul's fulfillment. And it can be sticky waters. And so all these stages really spoke to me, because I can see this ebb and flow in these patterns of when it's ease and when it's discomfort. So for me, and again, what I want to give to our listeners is to be able to say, and this is what I do say in my relationship, this is really hard right now, but I'm not afraid of the challenge.
That's
because
beautiful.
To me, this is a place for us to grow.
Yeah.
And so many people see challenge as a place to stop like I felt in my marriage. Whereas, no, this is just opportunity to grow. And we can learn about each other, learn about our needs, learn about new communication, learn about how can we, work together in the future.
I love what you're doing there too, because it would be a small takeaway in this, just like letting go of expectations and doing the small things is redefining, right? So really what you're doing in that is you're redefining what conflict means in a relationship. Conflict doesn't mean we're in trouble. Conflict just means something's changing or we have a different of opinion, and we can make it through change and differences of opinion with each other.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, my inner 5-year-old fear of abandonment sure comes out. Does this mean, what does this mean? Yeah. But then I can also be aware of, I'm really scared because this means that much to me. Right? So there's also that other reframe.
We feel deeply.
Oh, damn it. It's so true. Well, Jen, thank you so much. So I will have people to be able to access any way to get a hold of you or follow you on social media or be able to get your book, which again, I really love. So thank you for taking all of your knowledge and years of expertise and putting it in a framework that is really easy to follow and many couples could really benefit from.
Thank you so much, Jory. Yeah, and people can find me, jenelmquist.com. Super easy way to find me, get in contact with me. You can order the book from there. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, Jen Elmquist, and would love to have anybody follow along and stay connected with.
And you can follow her adventures of empty nexting.
Adventures of empty nexting. Yes, be first on the list to get that couple's book.
I love it. All right, Jen, thank you so much.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.